how many of us are thankful? And I think most of us would say that I am thankful. But as we think this morning about going beyond thankful, moving from being full of thanks to giving thanks. So looking up some statistics, and I think these statistics, of course, statistics are just statistics. They're out of the, they try to do surveys, but they're not always accurate, but I think they do show a big reflection. And this statistic, it was a study done in America, a Barna study, and it said nearly 80% of Americans saw that they feel blessed. Okay? So 80%. Now, if I was to do a poll here this morning, how many of us feel blessed or thankful? When you reflect on everything in life, do you think that on the greater scheme, now yes, there's problems here and there, but on the bigger scheme, is life good for you? And I think the majority of us, and probably 80% of us, and maybe even more, would say, I feel blessed. Now, when you think about that 80%, what is left? There's 20% who don't feel blessed. Now, the question is, which side is more vocal? The 80% or the 20%? Any thoughts? So often, it is that 20%, right? And in fact, other studies show that 10% of people regularly express in a meaningful way a thanks. 10%. So out of the 80% that say, I feel blessed, only 10% out of all of them actually express it in a meaningful way. That means 70% is silent. 20%, life is just awful, and they will let you know. 70%, yeah, life is good, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it. And only 10% actually express it in a meaningful way. Why is that? Why is that? And you know, we can give a lot of reasons, and we'll look at different reasons of why this is, and we'll look at a passage. In fact, the passage we'll look at in Luke chapter 17, a very familiar passage about the 10 lepers, and only one went back, which correlates with that 10%. Now, there's other studies. One survey said that 88% of British employees say they would work harder if they felt appreciated. How many of you would agree with that? You would work harder if you felt you were appreciated. Now, this is not just in the workplace. How many of you at home would work harder? You would do more if you just felt appreciated. In every area of life, we would do more if we saw that people were grateful for it. Now, there's another study here in the UK. 80% of people surveyed believe that people don't say thank you enough. How many of you would agree with that? Would 80% of you? If we feel that more people should say thank you, who should it start with? We want everybody else to express thanks, but have we looked in the mirror and begin with ourselves? We'll read this passage in Luke chapter 17, but I want to think about a thought. And really, gratitude isn't complete until it leaves your lips and reaches the ears of the one who touched your life. Think about that. And I should have had it as a slide up there on the wall so you could remember it. Gratitude isn't complete until it leaves your lips and reaches the ears of the one who touched your life. So if you have gratitude and it stays within your heart, it's not complete. It is only complete when it leaves your lips and reaches the ears of the one who touched your life. A phrase or a quote that I've used in the past: uncommunicated gratitude communicates ingratitude. Uncommunicated gratitude communicates to the other person ingratitude. Now, as we read through this passage, in Luke chapter 17, in verse 11, it says, "Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem that he passed," this is speaking of Jesus, "through the midst of Samaria and Galilee." So he's traveling from Capernaum down to Jerusalem, and on the way he's going through the regions of Samaria and Galilee. The Samaritans, they were half Jew, half Assyrian. They were a mixed race. They had a mixed religion. The Jews despised the Samaritans despised the Jews. But you had to pass through that region in order to get to Jerusalem. And here Jesus is passing through. It seems as though he's more in an area of the Galileans when he gets to this village, as we look in just a moment. But it says, "Then as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off, and they lifted up their voices and said, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.'" Just a quick thing with leprosy in that day and age. There was no cure. They didn't have a cure of trying to treat it. And in one sense, if you got leprosy, you were quarantined outside of the village. And when I think of leprosy, the closest thing that we can think of is COVID. Do you remember the days when you got COVID? Not only did you have to quarantine in your own house, but you had to quarantine in your own room, and everybody had to kind of like a 2-meter extension just to try to get it in to feed you, right? I mean, you quarantined from everybody. You walked down the street, and if you saw somebody coming down the street, what did we do? Well, we just walked on the other side of the road, and like antisocial to the max, right? Well, in a sense, this is what leprosy. If you had leprosy, you could not be near other people lest you pass it on to them. And so you had to keep your distance. You couldn't spend time with your loved ones, your friends. You were separate. So these 10 men who bonded together in this disease, they had something in common, and they had to shout from a far distance when they heard Jesus. They knew of him. They had heard of him, they knew his name, and they even knew his authority as they cried out, "Master." Verse 14, "So when he saw them, he said to them, 'Go show yourself to the priest.' And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed." Now, one of the things, if somebody had leprosy, if they were healed and the leprosy was gone, one of the first things they needed to do was go to the priest. And in a sense, back when we had COVID, what did you have to do before you could leave the house again? COVID test, right? You had to do the full-on COVID test. You couldn't leave the house until it was negative. Well, in the same sense, before they could come out of quarantine, they had to go to the priest, and the priest would look them over, make sure they didn't have one spot before they could be declared clean, so that they could go back and be with family. So Jesus, he's recognizing, I believe it's Leviticus chapter 13, gives all the what a leper was supposed to do if they were clean or unclean. And so Jesus says, "Go to the priest." They hadn't been healed yet, but each one of them, they went to go see the priest. And on the way, we don't know how far they went, but they were healed. Verse 15, "And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned, and with a loud voice glorified God and fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner?" And he said to him, "Arise, go your way, your faith has made you well." And the one phrase that I really want to emphasize, where are the 9? Think about that for a moment. Where are the 9? We won't go into great depths about the miracle and everything else, but I believe what this passage is emphasizing, that one question. Where are they? Wasn't there 10 that were healed? Where are the other 9? And before we start getting too critical against those 9, we have to put ourselves in the story and think, which one would I have been in? Would I have been the one individual who would have gone back and said thank you? Or would I have been of the 9 who would have kept on going? Which category would I have fallen into? The 90% or the 10%? Remember the statistics that we just gave earlier. 80% say they feel blessed, which means only 20% don't. But out of all of them, only 10% take that step to express that gratitude. And so before we get too judgmental against all of these 9, we have to reflect. And statistics today still say that only 10% actually make that move into expressing that gratitude. Why? Why is that? Why do we fail to take that step of expressing thanks? Why did these men fail to take that step of expressing things? How many of you think that the other 9 just were not grateful? I think when they saw that their body was healed, I am sure they were so excited. I mean, they were probably shouting. They were probably giving hugs. They were probably picked up the pace, run faster. I mean, they were just oozing with gratitude. But not enough to turn around. Not enough to go back to Jesus and say, thank you. Why? I think there's certain things. Now, if we were to emphasize the 20%, have you ever found it easier to complain than to say thank you? It is so much easier to complain than to say thank you. Why is that? And there are many different reasons. I think, we could look at the social side. We could look at the scientific side. I think the biggest thing is just the theological side, is that we are sinful at heart. We are proud at heart. And there is a sense that we can pick out flaws in other people or other things easier than we can pick out the good in others. Because if I can pick out something negative, I feel empowered and I feel more special. But there are other things. Scientifically, did you know that when you complain, you actually get a hit of dopamine, which is the happy chemical in us? And there is a sense that, I just letting it off my chest, I am just venting, and we actually get a dopamine high. And there's another element socially. Have you ever noticed that when you complain, you get a gathering as well? And it is a shortcut to get a group and a gathering. You make a statement. If you were to make a statement publicly today and complain, maybe not after today as we reflect on all of this, but on a normal day, if you make a statement and a complaint publicly, do you think you'll have other people coming up to you afterwards and agreeing with you? Absolutely. If you were to compliment and speak a praise, well, nobody would come up to you afterwards and say, you know what, I think the same thing. I am so grateful for whatever it is. But you make a public statement of a complaint, and you will find your crowd that comes up to you, you know what, I think the same way. I don't think that should be done that way either. I think it should be done this way. And you will get, and really, complaining is a shortcut to the dopamine high, to the connections. It is a shortcut to so many things, but it's not lasting. It's short-lived, which is why it continues the cycle of continue doing it and doing it and doing it. Because the dopamine high, the connections, it is short-lived. But in gratitude, expressing gratitude, it's not a shortcut, but it is long-lived. Connections built around gratitude will last. The scientific, the joy, the happiness built around gratitude will last. In fact, another statistic, we love statistics, right? Research in positive psychology has found that gratitude improves sleep, reduces stress, and increases happiness by up to 25%. Yet surveys also reveal most people admit they don't express gratitude daily. If you were to say, if somebody asked you, I could give you the ingredient or something specific that can relieve stress in your life, help you to sleep better, you will be more full of joy in your life. You just have to do one thing. How many of you would be up for that offer? I think most of us. Yeah, we all want to reduce stress. We all want to sleep better. We all want to just enjoy life better. Gratitude. Gratitude. Expressing that gratitude, not just within our hearts, but expressing it outwards. But as we reflect back on these individuals, why did they not go back and show gratitude? I think there's an element. It mentions specifically the one person that did go back was a Samaritan. Most likely the other 9 were Jews. And I think there's this element of pride and an element of entitlement. You will not express gratitude if you feel you were owed it. You will not express gratitude if you feel entitled to it, which really boils down to that pride. If you just expect it, you won't be grateful for it, right? If you think about the children, the young generation, we often think about they are entitled, right? But the honest truth, all of us feel entitled. We all feel owed something. I think there's another element, is the comparison and envy. These Jews may have been grateful until they saw the Samaritan receive the same thing. How many times, children, have you ever been grateful for something until you saw your sibling got just a tiny bit more? You were so thankful for that ice cream cone, but then you looked over and the sibling got just a fraction, just a tiny bit extra, and then what happens? Grumble and complain. You know, you might pull out your scale for different things. Weighing out the measurements of the coffee. I pull out the scale when I serve ice cream. I do. You get a Ben & Jerry's, it's 400 grams. Normally it's after Amara goes to bed, so there's only 4 of us left. And there's 4, and it's scooping it out. Normally it ends up being about 98 grams in each little dish. So when I serve it, there is absolutely no arguing which one is the bigger one. Now, sometimes I might lick the spoon afterwards, and I get that extra 2 grams of whatever that didn't get served. So I might get just a tiny bit more, but that's just the part of serving. But we do that. We feel grateful until we see somebody else. In work, you're thankful for that raise because you've been there for 5-10 years. But all of a sudden you find out the person that has just been there 6 months or a year, they got a raise too. So what do? You go straight to your boss, and you want more. Thankful until you see somebody else. Get it? You might think of too busy. I mean, these individuals, they were told to go do something. Shouldn't they just obey Jesus, right? And just keep on going to the priest? That's what Jesus told them to do. And sometimes we are too busy obeying Jesus or too busy doing what we're told to do that we never stop long enough and say thank you. Because we're doing a good thing. But it's not enough. Another aspect, I think, is inconvenience. We do not know how far these men went. This is in a village. Not every village had a priest. The main priest would be in Jerusalem, but they would also have priests in some of the larger towns in that area. It probably would have been at least 10, 20 miles for them to get to the nearest priest. Oftentimes, we think of they were healed almost like immediately after they started going. Maybe 100 yards down the road, they were healed. It could have been a mile down the road. It could have been 2 miles down the road. It could have been 5 miles down the road, halfway there. At what lengths would you turn around and give thanks? If you ran 2 miles towards the destination and you were healed, would you have stopped, run back 2 miles, which would mean you'd have to run another? So you'd be running 4 extra miles just to go back and say thank you. Isn't that inconvenient? And oftentimes that might be a reason we do not express thanks. I too busy. That would be inconvenient to actually get out a card and write that letter. It would be too inconvenient to get out my phone and give them a ring. It'd be too inconvenient and awkward to actually go up to them and actually express that I am thankful for this. These are all excuses that we give, right? There's another aspect. We just assume they already know I'm thankful, right? I mean, they know I'm excited. They just, I've received this great blessing. They know that I'm so grateful. And you know what? You might even go to other people. As these 9 individuals went on to see their friends and their family, do you think they ever told people about what Jesus had done for them? I'm sure they did. And in the midst of all that, I'm sure they expressed excitement. And they probably even expressed gratitude. But the problem is, the one person who deserved to hear a thanks never actually heard it. Everybody else might have heard thank you or expressed gratitude towards that person, but the one person who did the deed never actually received the thanks. And Jesus called it out. Weren't there 10? What happened to the other 9? Which means Jesus expected that all 10 should have come back and said thank you. Now there is another aspect. There is another statement. And I have actually heard it. They shouldn't be doing it for a thanks. They should be doing it for God. And that is an excuse that some people even use. In fact, sometimes I have said thank you to somebody for doing a specific task. And I've heard them respond, you don't have to thank me, I'm doing it for God. Well, I get that, but you also have to realize if you don't do it, I'm probably going to be the one that comes behind, and I'm going to have to be doing it. So I am thankful that you are doing it for God so that I don't have to fill in and do that. Right? But in this story, Jesus, was he doing it only to get a thanks? Absolutely not. He was doing it to change these individuals' lives. But yet in doing it, he deserved thanks. He deserved this man to go back, or these men to go back and say, thank you for what I've done. And so that idea is just an excuse that we put as a very pious front. They should be doing it for God and not for a thanks. No. If you have been blessed and you are thankful for it, express it to that person that has done it. Say thank you. Because I guarantee you, they have heard other people complain to them. In fact, anything new, you may be thankful for something new, but if it's something new, I guarantee you there's other people that have mentioned a complaint about that new. So unless you express your thanks for whatever it is, there's going to be hearing on the other side. In all of this, Jesus reflects and he says, were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? So when we think about all of this, where are the 9? And am I one of the 9? Am I one of the 9? Jesus says in verse 19, and he said to him, arise, go your way, your faith has made you well. And I believe this well, it's being made whole. I believe it was something deeper. It wasn't just the physical healing being made well on the outside. It was a complete wholeness. There was something, as he expressed this gratitude, he received a greater healing, a wholeness on the inside, not only on the outside. When we express gratitude, we often think it is for the other person. But we receive the benefit as well. It changes us on the inside. Statement I think I used last year. The ability to express gratitude reveals the ability to have humility. When we say thank you, it takes humility in order to do that. And it has the ability to express that gratitude, that humility. Now, as I mentioned about complaining, anybody can complain. You can go home and complain about everything is not the way it ought to be. Anybody can see things out of place, right? But it takes skill and observance to see what could have been done, what the place would have looked like if nothing had been done, right? You come home from work, now it's easy. Like, if I come home, what if the house is not completely tidy? What if the meal is not fully made? It could be easy for me to complain, but it takes an observance to recognize, with 3 kids in the house, busy all day long, what would have this house looked like if you were just sitting down and watching Netflix all day? Think about that. It takes an observance in order to see what you can't see. Think about that. It takes an observance to see what you can't see. If somebody has picked up the rubbish, you can't see that that rubbish has been picked up, and you never even thought about that rubbish because you never saw it. And it takes an observant to actually stop, look around, and see, wow, the house is much better than what it could have been, right? Hey, I'm speaking to myself. But I think in every area of life, it is easy to see things that are out of place. But it takes an observance to stop for a moment and think it could have been worse. But there's been a lot of work that has gone into it to get it to where it is. And when we stop and observe all the work so that we don't see what we could have seen, that is when we begin expressing gratitude. Whether at work, whether at home, whether within the church, wherever it is in life, pausing long enough to observe what has been done rather than what hasn't been done. There's another observation with these lepers. Jesus could have just healed them on the spot like he did. I believe it was Luke chapter 5. Immediately, just touched them. Boom, they were healed. But instead, these men had to travel 10, 20 miles. Why didn't Jesus just heal us then and there? And so it's easy. We can just complain that it didn't happen the way we want it to happen. But instead, we need to stop and recognize what has happened, how we have been blessed, the good that we have received, and communicate it to the person who has done it. Whether it is God, stop and recognize all that God has done. Giving us life, waking up in the morning and our heart is still beating. We still have the ability to get out, to come here to the church, to fellowship with one another, to have friends, to have family. But most of all, as much as we have failed, our friends, our family, and God who has created us, yet He loves us. And He came to this earth, took on human flesh to go to the cross and die in our place, to take our sins upon Himself and to suffer the payment that I deserve to die. That alone ought to cause us to be grateful. To wake up every single morning and I deserve death and separation from God for all eternity, and yet He loved me and took my place and paid for my sin. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. When you think about within our home, yeah, your spouse, your children, they may fail a lot of times. But what if they were taken from you? Think about that. What if they were taken from you? Then, oftentimes when we go to a funeral, you hear about the gushing thanks about all that the person has done. But you know what? The sad thing is, many times they never heard it in person. Think about that. Only in life can we express our gratitude to those people. And yes, at a funeral, we can express it to everybody else, but they never heard it. Will we stop for a moment and express the gratitude to the people that mean so much to us? And say, I'm thankful for you. In the midst of all of your flaws, yeah, but I am thankful for you as a person and all that you do. Whether it's at work, there's a lot of complaining that we could do with work. But are you thankful for your job? Are you thankful for the ability to do what you're doing? Even though it may not be the best situation or best circumstance, whatever it might be, do you stop for a moment and be thankful for what you do have rather than complaining what you don't have? Whether it's in the church, There's a lot of things that we can complain about, this, that, or the other. But do we stop long enough and be grateful for what we do have and express the gratitude to others? In fact, there was John Piper. I'll close with this. I wasn't planning on going this long, but John Piper, I was at a conference a couple years ago, and it was expressed when he went to the church, just there was such a negative culture within the church. So the question was presented, well, what did you do about that? And he said, I encouraged the positive people to speak out louder. And eventually, as the positive people, because remember, 70% of the positive people never speak out. Only the 10% actually speak out. But if you can get the 70 other percent to actually speak out, it changes the culture. And that 20% all of a sudden realize they're in the minority, because only if 10% speak out positive and 20% speak out negative, that 20% feel like they're in the majority. You get the others to speak out. And he said eventually, what would happen? The negative would all of a sudden start recognizing the positive, and they might switch over, or the negative just remain silent, or the negative would just leave. But either way, he said the culture changed, and there was an extremely positive attitude within the church. What would happen if the positive didn't just remain the 70% silent? What would happen if that 10% grew and there was gratitude expressed wherever we went, in our homes, in our workplace, in our church, wherever we went, we recognized the gratitude and expressed the gratitude beyond thankful, moving from being full of thanks to giving thanks.